I'm Mike Uyak. I love to try new things, and I've had culinary adventures all around the world, as well as right at home. I've had really wonderful food, as well as some really horrible food. I'd like to share some of my adventures with you, and we'll see if I have what it takes to fix whatever goes wrong. This is Recipe Redemption.
Greetings and salutations, Redeemers, and welcome to another episode of Recipe Redemption. Today, I kind of want to talk about physics. This is another episode where I want to talk about gear specifically. So it occurred to me recently in going through some of the recipes that I wanted to do that several videos for this season, if you want to call it that, this year, just happened to all involve ice cream. And so I said, okay, why not just take a weekend and do all of the ice cream videos all together? Great idea, except my ice cream machine is this guy, which makes two quarts of ice cream at a time. Well, and it's okay at making smaller amounts, but I find that the clearance between the blade that scrapes the sides and the actual sides of the freezing container, it doesn't, when you have a small volume in there, it doesn't work as well, it doesn't quite scrape off. There's still a layer that sort of freezes to the side. And it doesn't aerate properly. Secondly, a lot of the recipes that I'm doing, the flavors of ice cream that I'm going to make, I don't really want a whole lot of. Or at least I don't think I do. I don't know if I do. But to be safe, I want something that makes a smaller amount. So I bought this guy. This makes about 1.5 cups, and it really makes only about a cup of ice cream at a time. And that's fine. That's all I'm going to want for the recipes that I'm doing. Here's the freezing container. So this, there's a handy cup to hold it in so you don't freeze your hand. This goes in the freezer, and it says for at least 4 hours, preferably overnight. There's a motor, and comes with a little plastic rotating beater that spins around and actually churns the ice cream for you. I tried this out already, and I'm not super impressed. The Cuisinart, it's designed well, it works great. I've been happy with it. I've made a couple of different ice creams with it. I've made 3 different ice creams with this one so far, and they've all been kind of lackluster. And there's a good reason for it, and it's right here. This is a relatively thin-walled vessel. It's about, based on my little pinch test here, if these are calipers, maybe a little over a ½ inch, 5/8 of an inch thick. And it's filled with a liquid. It's probably just water. It might be salt water. Salt water has a slightly lower freezing temperature than just regular plain pure water. But it's filled with a liquid that freezes solid when you freeze it, but because this is basically a thermos, essentially, it's a double-walled vessel filled with fluid, there's not actually a whole lot of fluid in there. And that's a problem, because the smaller an object is, the more the ratio between its surface area and its volume goes up. Now, why is that important? A large surface to mass ratio means that there's a lot of surface area compared to its mass for heat to transfer in or out. Now, with the big ice cream maker, the reservoir that the ice cream goes into is over an inch thick, and it's just overall larger. I mean, you are freezing a larger volume of ice cream, but it's thicker. There's more of the fluid your heat sink. There's more of it there. And so it tends to work a little better because it has more freezing capacity. This does not. So even though it's freezing a smaller volume of whatever of your ice cream mix, because it's got such a small volume, this thaws out a lot faster than the big one does. And in 2 of the 3 test batches of ice cream that I made, it thawed out before the ice cream fully churned up. Mostly what you get when you use an ice cream maker of any kind, even the hand cranked one that you were subjected to as a kid, generally speaking, you're going to get about a soft serve consistency on your ice cream. So you need to scoop it out of there, stick it into a freezer, and actually freeze it so that it hardens a little bit. But the whole point of churning is to introduce air. And basically to allow it to freeze so that it forms really small ice crystals, because otherwise, if you just took your ice cream mix and just shoved it in the freezer, it would freeze just fine, but it would be a solid block of ice, and it wouldn't be ice cream. It would be iced cream, it would be a block of ice. So by churning it, you make sure that the ice crystals don't have a chance to actually link up with each other and form a huge crystal lattice. They're all individual ice crystals. And you incorporate air, which also interferes with the ice crystals linking up, but also gives you a sort of a smoother mouthfeel when you eat the ice cream. And they tend to talk in the industry in terms of air incorporation. When you churn it, if it's 100%, it means that 100% of the original volume has been added in air. Or another way of looking at it is the final product is 50% air. And there's government regulations as to how much air you actually introduce. You can be a little shady. The cheaper ice creams have a lot of air incorporated into them. So what you're actually paying for is mostly air and not ice cream. Or more air, I'll put it that way, more air than a more expensive ice cream, which tends to have a little bit less air incorporated, and therefore you have more actual ice cream that you're eating. And of course you're going to pay for that. So I was a little disappointed in this, but I want to do some experiments to see if I can make this work. And there's a couple of things that you want to do, that you want to do anyway with ice cream. You want to refrigerate your ice cream mix for at least a couple of hours before you actually churn it. Now, obviously, this has to be in the freezer, freezing for preferably 24 hours, just to make sure it's good and frozen when you get ready to use it. But you want your mix as cold as you can get it before you actually start churning, because the less thermal distance that it has to go before it becomes ice cream, the more likely that your ice cream maker will actually make it into ice cream, and not just slightly chilled mix, which is what it mostly did. I want to try taking each of my mixes. Like I said, I'm going to be making a whole bunch of ice cream this weekend. I want to try first of all, taking each of the mixes and putting it in the freezer for about 20 to 30 minutes. I don't want it to actually start freezing, but I want to drop the temperature down as close to freezing as I can get, so that when I pour it in here, it's got 2 degrees to go, and see if that works. If it doesn't, then the next thing that I have to do, if I want this to work, is to make this colder, or to give this more heat capacity, so I can draw more heat out of the ice cream mix. Now, a couple of different ways you can do that, I figure. Make this colder than just freezer temperature. Way to do that is get a hold of some dry ice, pack it full of dry ice, stick it in the stick in the freezer, because it doesn't really have to be, but let it sit with dry ice in contact with this for half hour to an hour. Dry ice has a temperature more like minus -70 Celsius, I think it is. And this is, well, you know, -5 maybe. So by making it colder, it'll give it a little more oomph for the freezing process to happen. The other thing that I wanted to try is if you basically gave this an almost infinite heat capacity. And the way to do that is if I can trail the cord for the motor out through the door of the freezer and just hopefully the door seal will seal around this. Put this whole kit and caboodle into the freezer and run it in the freezer so that the freezer itself is helping to add a little heat capacity to this otherwise lackluster performer. I'm kind of curious to see how these will turn out. So here's the basic idea for my ice cream base, to which I'm going to add the various flavors for all these videos that I'm going to be shooting this weekend. Let's get started on the base.
I'm going to start my ice cream base off with 8 egg yolks beaten, to which I'm going to add about half of my sugar, which ends up being about 2 cups. Don't forget, I'm making a whole lot because I'm making several batches of ice cream here. This is the beginning of a French custard style ice cream. You can leave the eggs out if you wish, but I didn't. Next, over medium heat, I'm going to add 8 cups, or this is 1 quart, of half and half, and a cup of heavy whipping cream. Oh yes, and the other 2 cups of sugar. And I'm just going to continue heating that until it's just barely up to a simmer. Once that milk mixture is up to a simmer, I'm going to turn the heat down, and I'm going to add a little bit of it at a time into the egg yolk mixture. This is a process known as tempering. It's going to bring the egg yolks slowly up to temperature so they don't curdle or turn into scrambled eggs, because that's not what we're making today. Once I've got about 3 ladlefuls added in, it's probably hot enough that I can now slowly add it into the milk mixture. Still whisking constantly, and continue cooking that over low heat until it thickens to the desired consistency. Basically, you want a good, what they call a nappe. It'll coat the back of a spoon. Once it starts to thicken, this is the point where you would add other flavor ingredients. Now I'm just going to turn the heat off and let this cool. Since I'm going to be using this in so many different recipes, it's going to take me a little while, and I don't want this to continue cooking since it doesn't have to. My freezer reservoir has been frozen, and I can assemble my ice cream maker here. My mix has not only been refrigerated, it has actually been put in the freezer for about a half an hour, so it is nice and cold. And you can see that actually did start to freeze a little bit onto the container. This is the mustard ice cream. That's right, mustard ice cream. You'll see. Just going to pour that in. Then gently insert the beater until the motor seats, and then turn it on. I'm going to let this go for 10 minutes. The motor started sounding like it was working harder, so I shut it off, and hey, sure enough, this is much better than before. So it looks like the strategy of pre-freezing the ice cream mixture, bringing it down to almost freezing temperature before churning, seems to be the way to go. However, I did say I wanted to try the other means of chilling stuff down, so we're going to try those out too. So it turns out my local grocery store actually sells blocks of dry ice. So I just got some, and I'm actually using my meat tenderizer, because I didn't feel like going to get a hammer, to break these up into more manageable pieces. Please note, you should never, ever, 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 ever handle dry ice with bare hands, like I'm doing. Never, ever do that. And especially, don't handle dry ice with bare hands that are wet. That can be even worse for you, because it'll freeze that water in no time flat. But in any case, I'm loading as much of this dry ice into the freezer barrel as I can, including all this powdery stuff, just because, waste not, want not. Then I'll set that aside and let it freeze for a little while, about 10 minutes. And look at that, 10 minutes has elapsed. A lot of that dry ice is actually sublimed away. Just going to dump that out. Going to reassemble my ice cream maker here and proceed with churning of the next batch of ice cream. I believe this is the, yes, French onion ice cream. It's a bit of a disturbing color, but I'm going with it. It smells amazing, however. In it goes. And I had the fan running, so the audio is garbage. But this made some rather disturbing cracking noises when I poured the mix in. But in any case, here we go. Here's churning. And after about 4 minutes of churning, the motor started making a sound like an unbalanced washing machine. So I shut it off and, hey, look at that. It's frozen. Much faster, much thicker than expected. In fact, almost probably too cold, because I'm willing to bet there's probably a good solid layer of ice cream frozen around the sides of the barrel, and that's not ideal. You want it to actually churn and get the air in it and all that good stuff, and instead it just froze solid to the side. So this wasn't necessarily the ideal way of doing this, but it did chill it fast, and it's really hard to get out. And lastly, going to put my ice cream maker switched on onto a shelf in my freezer here. Then trailing the cord out the door, going to shut the door, try to make sure that the door seal actually seals around the cord as much as it can, and then plug this sucker in. I'm going to let it run for 20 minutes instead of the usual 10 to give it some time for the freezer to help the freezer barrel actually make ice cream. And look at that, it's actually frozen down. Now, this is actually a combination of techniques. I had put a little bit of dry ice in here as well, just to get it to freeze at all between different batches of ice cream, and that may have been a mistake, because this is a little bit more firm than I'd like to see. It probably would, if I let that go for too long, it might have burnt the motor out.
As with anything, getting the most out of your gear comes down to learning how to use it properly, learning its idiosyncrasies, and figuring out how to get it to work better if the proper way doesn't work. As it turns out, just sticking the ice cream mix into the freezer for about 20 minutes before you actually put it into the ice cream machine gives the ice cream machine just that extra little bit of oomph, because it thermally doesn't have to go as far. So did I need the dry ice? No. Did I need to stick the ice cream machine in the freezer? No. I did, just to see if it would help, and it did, but it ultimately wasn't necessary.
even though it's fun to play with dry ice. It comes down to just tweaking the procedure a little bit sometimes. Sometimes the gear just doesn't work. It's just crap. And, you know, live and learn. You can learn to figure out for yourself whether or not it's something you want to live with or something that just doesn't work for you and you need to get something that works better. So, until next time, I've got a lot of ice cream to eat. So I should get to that. I'd like to thank you for watching, and if you have any comments or suggestions for other gear that you'd like me to review and or try out, please let me know. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. But until next time, I'd like to thank you for watching. I'm Mike Uyak, and this is Recipe Redemption. Bye.